Mr. Speaker, first of all, this is going to be a contribution coming inside closing opposition, right? We're going to be addressing the largest spectrum of the internet community, but this is actually been ignored by everyone who came before us, right? They talked about all these minorities protesting, all these minorities abusing the internet. What we're going to do, we're going to address where the real debate lies, the larger majority of the internet community, who are divorced from all the issues that they're talking about in terms of all these the cybercrime and all this stuff. Like, how does this affect them? So this is the extension coming from closing opposition. I'm going to talk to you about characterizing the nature of the internet. I'm surprised no one else talked about it yet. It's so important. I'll talk to you about the importance of anonymity. I'll also talk to you about the checks and balances within the internet. Also, most importantly, the role of the government and why this is excessive. Right? But before that, I'm going to go into a few rebuttals first. All right? Deal directly with the extensions coming from the speaker previously. She told us about how this would create a more responsible community when you have all these checks and balances, right? But, Mr. Speaker, we tell you that it doesn't necessarily happen. What actually would really happen if you do this, you just create a backlash of the internet community. All you do is you piss them off even more than before. We look at the recent action by the Malaysian government to censor or to filter out like these what do you call those file sharing websites, right? And what happened after that was that there were like attacks on the government websites because they started doing this, right? So this shows this is evidence to show that when government infringes on the freedom of speech, especially something like the internet, the government already promised already promised never to censor. When you do this, all you do is end up aggravating and pissing off a lot of the youth of today who actually do go to the internet and who actually do appreciate the anonymity that's found in the internet. They don't want the government to do this, and in doing this, it's not making them even happier. It just pisses them off even more, which creates all the backlash. It's not going to be good for the government anyway. And even if you're talking about getting people to support the government, all this really does is just fuels more protests anyway, right? People who were before apolitical and neutral, they didn't know what the government policies are, but they were apolitical. When you do this, you give them a reason to not like the government at hand. So if you are already trying to say that you want to support the government, what you should do is not do these kind of things and piss people off. That's exactly what you're going to do when you do this, when you ban anonymity, right? Now, secondly, the social contract. I don't really get this, but what you said was under the social contract, somehow the government provides security and firewall to this, right? I don't see any of this in the like it isn't coming up in the first speaker, right? So I don't know where it's coming up with this from. But basically, we pay for the internet, right? We pay for antivirus software, right? It's nothing to do with the government. The government doesn't provide this for us. So I think the social contract part is a bit false and doesn't really stand in this debate, right? So the extension really wasn't very important on their side. Now, looking at the debate that came before us, right? The opening government took on the burden, and I assume the closing also takes on the same burden because we did not say anything about it. But the opening government takes on the burden that they want to solve rape and they want to solve money laundering, right? Money laundering wasn't really elaborated, but basically it's this, right? Even if you ban anonymity, even if it's successful, even if it prevents pedophiles from raping kids, we think the larger amount of spectrum where rapes happen is not so much because of internet people planning it out. It's more situational. A rapist goes out, sees a potential victim, he rapes them. There is no pre-planned thing happening, right? Even if the age is a small minority, so the rapes still happen anyway, right? So you're harming a lot of people when you take away anonymity. But the benefit you're getting is only affecting maybe a small amount of cases of rape. The benefit of money laundering may be only a small amount of cases, right? Even if you know who is doing the money laundering, right? Banks also provide. Banks are also anonymous about the transactions that happen. Even if you ban anonymity in the internet, banks still provide anonymity anyway. Swiss banks especially, that's where all the money laundering goes to anyway. So you're not solving the burden, right? So if you've taken on their burden, you do not help their case anyway. So what's your response?
Well, it's nothing to do with money laundering, but which one causes more backlash in the internet community? An anonymous comment which is completely irrational, or a person who uses an open account but chooses their words carefully while,
Okay, thank you. I want to emphasize the fact that she just shafted a government's burden, right? Now, secondly, she talked about what's going to happen, right? I'm going to go into that in my speech about how the internet already has checks and balances within itself, right? There are already ways for the internet community to regulate itself and to deal with the problems of people posting comments people don't like. So I'm going to go into that right now. So what is the nature of the internet, right? Internet is a place where you can go into anonymously and you almost lead a second life. You have the ability to be anyone you want to, have the ability to espouse opinions that are different from what you can in real life, right? Sometimes when we come to conservative societies, in societies, or maybe in other countries where the societies are very conservative, you can't really espouse things like maybe homosexuality, things like atheism. You can't espouse that openly, right? But when you're in the realm of the internet, when you're anonymous, right, when these things can be traced back to you, that's when you can really express those opinions, right? Maybe some of us disagree with it, maybe some of us agree with it. But the point is there has to be a diversity of opinions. And we think that's very important when it comes to the internet and it comes to freedom of expression, right? Only the internet truly provides this kind of diversity of opinions, which you do not hear in conservative countries. Or maybe they are, but they just don't, they're afraid of expressing these ideas because of the backlash that would happen. So if you do this, especially in a country like Malaysia, right, you have in a conservative, and something more conservative than a liberal democracy, right? When you do this in Malaysia, you shut out a lot of people who otherwise been able to express these ideas they wouldn't have been able to before this. So you effectively, what you do is you reduce the amount of diversity of opinions in the internet sphere. You reduce the amount of tolerance people have to that those opinions, right? The kind of dialogues that happen are very crucial, and we think this is where the real majority of the people of the internet users really lie, right? Not everyone is looking out there to rape people. Not everyone uses the internet out to do bad things. A majority of the people just want to use the internet because of the fact that it gives you the freedom of expression you don't get in real life. And the very important part of that is because of anonymity of the internet. When you do this, you rob the majority, and this is very important, you rob the majority of that, of having that privilege, all for the sake of a small minority of maybe, a few rape cases you prevent, maybe a few cases of money laundering. A small benefit that you have does not outweigh the huge harm that affects the majority of people. So what have I told you today, right? I've told you first of all that the real nature of the internet affects the majority of people. The majority of people aren't what I just told you today, right? The majority of people want to have the expression, the majority of people want to have the diversity of opinion, the majority of people want to have the internet the way they want to, and they are preventing that. We are very proud of those.
Thank you.